I stared at my reflection in the pristine kitchen window, my hands trembling slightly as I gripped the edge of the marble counter. The words my mother-in-law Margaret had spat at me during last night's family dinner still rang in my ears. "You don't even know how to make a proper salad, dear." The condensation of her contempt in that last word, dear, could have frozen over hell itself. The weekly family dinners at the Thompson household had always been a battlefield, but yesterday's ambush had pushed me to my breaking point. For 3 years, I'd endured Margaret's subtle jabs and not-so-subtle criticisms about my cooking, my housekeeping, my career choices, everything that made me who I was. But this time she'd gone too far, humiliating me in front of the entire family. "I don't understand why you can't follow a simple recipe," she'd announced to the table, picking at the quinoa salad I'd brought with obvious distaste. In my day, women took pride in their cooking. They made an effort. The way she'd emphasized effort made it clear she thought I was lacking in that department too. My husband William had shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but said nothing, as usual. His silence hurt almost as much as Margaret's words. The rest of the family had studiously examined their plates, the awkwardness thick enough to cut with one of Margaret's prized silver knives. What none of them knew, what I'd never told anyone in the family, was that I hadn't just learned to cook. I'd trained at Le Cordon Bleu in Paris, working my way through the program while juggling 2 jobs. After graduation, I'd spent 2 years as a sous chef at a 3 Michelin-starred restaurant, learning under some of the most demanding chefs in the world. I'd kept my culinary background secret when I met William, wanting to be loved for who I was, not what I could do in the kitchen. But now, as I stood in my kitchen the morning after another disastrous family dinner, something inside me shifted. The morning light caught the edge of my professional knife set, hidden away in a drawer beneath the basic knives Margaret had given me as a wedding present. My fingers itched to pull them out, to feel the familiar weight of proper tools in my hands again. I'd spent years dimming my light, making deliberately mediocre dishes for these family gatherings to avoid overshadowing Margaret's traditional cooking. I'd convinced myself it was for the best, that keeping the peace was more important than being true to myself. But as I recalled the smirk on her face when she'd announced to everyone that I'd never be a proper wife because I couldn't even make a decent meal, I knew things had to change. My phone buzzed on the counter, a message from William. "Mom wants to host a special dinner next weekend. The whole extended family will be there. She wants you to bring a side dish again." I picked up my phone, a plan already forming in my mind. It was time to stop hiding. Time to show them exactly who they'd been underestimating all these years. But first, I needed to make a few calls to my old contacts in the culinary world. As I dialed the first number, my hand steady now, I couldn't help but smile. Margaret had no idea what she'd set in motion with her latest attempt to humiliate me. The next family dinner was going to be one nobody would ever forget, especially my dear mother-in-law. My old chef mentor in Paris had always said that revenge, like the finest soufflé, was best served at precisely the right moment. And after 3 years of simmering under Margaret's constant criticism, that moment had finally arrived. The familiar scent of fresh herbs filled my apartment as I unlocked the door to my home office, or what everyone else thought was just a spare room for storage. Behind the carefully arranged boxes and old furniture visible from the doorway lay my secret sanctuary, a small but meticulously organized collection of my most treasured culinary accomplishments and memories. I pulled out a worn leather portfolio from behind a stack of wedding presents we'd never opened. Inside were the photographs, certificates, and reviews I'd kept hidden for so long. My fingers traced over a yellowed newspaper clipping from Le Figaro, featuring a review of Restaurant L'Étoile where I'd worked as sous chef. The critic had specifically mentioned the innovative young American sous chef, whose sauces demonstrate a masterful understanding of classical French techniques while bringing a fresh perspective to traditional dishes. The memory of those days in Paris flooded back. The brutal 18-hour shifts, the burns and cuts, the perfectly executed dishes, and most importantly, the respect I'd earned through sheer determination and skill. I'd worked my way up from washing dishes to become the youngest sous chef in the restaurant's history. Chef Bernard, my mentor, had seen something in me that I sometimes forgot was there. My phone buzzed again. Another text from William. Mom's asking what you're planning to bring to the dinner. She hopes it won't be another experiment. I felt a familiar knot form in my stomach, but this time it was different. Instead of shame, I felt anger, not just at Margaret, but at myself for allowing her to make me feel small all these years. I thought back to the day I'd decided to hide my culinary background from William and his family. We'd met at a friend's barbecue where I'd deliberately brought store-bought potato salad. After years of working in high-pressure kitchens where every dish had to be perfect, where one mistake could cost you your job, I'd wanted a relationship that had nothing to do with food. When William mentioned his mother was an amazing cook who hosted elaborate family dinners, I'd made a split-second decision to keep my background to myself. I'm not much of a cook, I'd told him on our third date, watching his face carefully. I hope that's not a deal-breaker. His relief had been obvious. No competition for his mother's culinary throne. No complicated chef girlfriend with impossible standards. But now, sitting among the evidence of my true passion and expertise, I realized what a mistake that had been. I'd sacrificed a fundamental part of myself to avoid conflict, and all it had gotten me was 3 years of subtle degradation and mounting resentment. I pulled out my old recipe journal, its pages stained with butter and marked with hastily scribbled notes from my time in Paris. Chef Bernard's voice echoed in my memory. Cuisine n'est pas seulement de la nourriture, c'est une déclaration. Cooking isn't just food, it's a statement. Well, it was time to make my statement. I opened my laptop and began compiling a list of ingredients I'd need. This wasn't going to be just another side dish. This would be a carefully orchestrated symphony of flavors, techniques, and timing. But first, I needed to make one important call. I dialed a number I hadn't used in years, my heart pounding as I waited. After 3 rings, a familiar French accent answered, "Hello? Chef Bernard? C'est Amelia. I need your advice about something important." His warm chuckle came through the line. "Ma petite lionne. Finally. I was wondering when you would remember who you are." As I explained the situation, leaving out none of the embarrassing details about how I'd been hiding my skills, I could practically see him shaking his head. When I finished, there was a long pause. "You know what I am going to say, non?" His voice was gentle, but firm. A true chef doesn't hide their light under a bushel. It is not about pride or showing off. It is about respect. Respect for the craft, for the ingredients, and most importantly, for yourself. "I know," I whispered, tears pricking at my eyes. "I've been disrespecting everything you taught me." "Non, ma chérie. You have been learning a different kind of lesson. But now it is time to return to your true self. And for that," he paused, and I could hear him shuffling through papers. "I have just the recipe. Something that will be impossible to dismiss as beginner's luck, but also impossible to replicate without years of training. Are you ready?" I grabbed my old notebook, flipping to a clean page. "Yes, chef." As he began to detail the recipe, one of the most challenging dishes I'd mastered under his tutelage, I felt a familiar fire igniting inside me. This wasn't just about proving something to Margaret anymore. This was about reclaiming who I was, who I'd worked so hard to become. By the time I hung up the phone, my notebook was filled with detailed notes, and my mind was racing with preparations I'd need to make. I had 1 week to practice and perfect every element. 1 week to prepare for a dinner that would change everything. I reached for my keys. I needed to visit some specialty suppliers I hadn't been to in years. As I headed for the door, my phone buzzed one more time. A text from Margaret. "Dear, perhaps you should just bring a green salad this time. Even you can't ruin that too badly." I smiled as I typed my reply. "Don't worry, Margaret. I promise what I bring will be unforgettable." The specialty food market's door chimed as I walked in, and the familiar scent of fresh truffles and aged cheese enveloped me. Marco, the owner, was arranging a display of imported olive oils. He looked up, did a double take, and broke into a wide grin. "Amelia, is that really you? It's been, 3 years?" "Too long," I admitted, feeling a mix of guilt and nostalgia. This place had once been my second home, where I'd source ingredients for my private catering events after leaving Paris. Marco had always set aside the best products for me, knowing I'd appreciate them. "I need everything on this list," I said, handing him a carefully prepared document. and I'm going to need your absolute best." His eyebrows rose as he scanned the items. "This is quite a shopping list. Planning something special?" "You could say that." I couldn't help but smile. "A family dinner." Marco whistled low as he read through the ingredients. "With these components, this isn't just dinner. This is warfare. Sometimes they're the same thing," I muttered, thinking of Margaret's smug face. As Marco gathered my supplies, my phone buzzed. "William." I hesitated before answering. "Hey, where are you? I came home for lunch and you weren't there." The concern in his voice made me pause. William was a good man, kind, loving, supportive in most ways, except when it came to standing up to his mother. "Just running some errands," I said, watching Marco carefully wrap fresh morels in paper. "For the family dinner." There was a long pause. "Look, about that. Mom called. She thinks maybe it would be better if you didn't bring anything this time. She's worried about me embarrassing the family again." The words came out sharper than I intended. "That's not what she said, but it's what she meant." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "William, we need to talk, not over the phone. Can you come home early today?" Another pause. "Is everything okay?" "It will be, just, please?" After he agreed, I hung up and turned back to Marco, who was pretending not to have heard my conversation. He'd finished gathering everything on my list, adding a few extra items I hadn't asked for but would need. "On the house," he said when I tried to object to the additions. "Consider it a welcome back gift. Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" "Whatever you're planning. Make it memorable." Back home, I transformed our kitchen into the professional workspace I'd been craving for years. My real knives came out of hiding, along with the other tools I'd kept stored away. I set up my mise en place with practiced precision, falling easily into the rhythms I'd learned in Paris. The dish Chef Bernard had suggested was a contemporary take on a classical French recipe, something that required multiple complex techniques and perfect timing. I'd need several practice runs to get it exactly right. I was so absorbed in my prep work that I didn't hear William come in. The sound of his briefcase hitting the floor made me jump. He stood in the kitchen doorway, staring at the transformed space. His eyes moved from the professional knife roll to the expensive ingredients to my stance, the confident professional pose I'd unconsciously adopted. "What's all this?" I wiped my hands on my apron, not the cute floral one Margaret had given me, but my old professional one from L'Etoile. "This is who I really am, William. Who I've always been." I gestured to the kitchen island where I'd laid out my certificates, reviews, and photographs. His face changed as he moved closer, picking up the French newspaper clipping. You worked at a 3-star Michelin restaurant? In Paris? As sous chef? For 2 years." I watched his face carefully. "Before that, I trained at Le Cordon Bleu. I've been cooking professionally since I was 18. He looked up, confusion and hurt warring in his expression. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because..." I struggled to find the right words. "Because when we met, I was tired. Tired of being defined by what I could do in a kitchen. Tired of the pressure, the expectations. And then I met your mother, and she was so proud of being the family's culinary expert. And you seemed so relieved when I said I wasn't much of a cook. So you've been pretending? All this time?" His voice had an edge to it now. "Deliberately cooking badly for family dinners?" "Not badly," I corrected. "Just, simply, below my capabilities." I moved closer to him. "William, your mother has been belittling me for 3 years, making me feel worthless because she thinks I can't cook. And you've never once defended me." He flinched at that. "I didn't want to make things worse. Worse than watching your wife be humiliated at every family gathering?" The silence stretched between us, filled with the unsaid things we'd both been avoiding for years. Finally, William picked up one of the photographs, me in my chef's whites, standing proudly in the kitchen of L'Etoile. "You look different here. Confident, happy." I was. I touched the edge of the photo. I am when I'm being true to myself. "And now? What are you planning?" I gestured to my prep station. "I'm going to cook, really cook, for the family dinner. No more hiding, no more pretending to be less than I am. Mom will... I don't care what your mother will do or say. I interrupted, then softened my tone. But I care what you'll do. Will you stand with me this time? He was quiet for a long moment, looking at the evidence of my past life spread across the counter. Then he picked up one of the morels I'd been cleaning. Will you teach me? He asked quietly. What you're making, I mean. I'd like to help, to understand this part of you. I felt tears prick at my eyes as I smiled. Of course. I handed him an apron. First lesson, proper knife technique. As I began to show him how to hold a chef's knife correctly, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. Whatever happened at the family dinner, at least my husband finally knew the real me. But there was still so much work to be done. The next few days would require all my skill and concentration to prepare not just the dish, but myself for what was to come. As I watched William awkwardly attempt to julienne a carrot, I knew this was just the beginning. 3 days before the family dinner, I was in my element. The kitchen had become my sanctuary once again, filled with the sounds and smells of serious cooking. I'd gone through 4 practice runs of the dish Chef Bernard had suggested, each one bringing me closer to the perfection I demanded of myself. William had been watching me work whenever he could, fascinated by this side of me he'd never known existed. You're different here, he said, perched on a stool at the counter. You move differently, more sure of yourself. I was in the middle of preparing a complex sauce reduction, my movements precise and measured. This is who I've always been, I replied, not taking my eyes off the sauce. I just forgot it for a while. The phone rang, Margaret's special ringtone. William reached for it, but I shook my head. Speaker, I said, not breaking my rhythm with the sauce. William, darling, Margaret's voice filled the kitchen. I've been thinking about the dinner this Saturday. I know Amelia said she wanted to bring something, but I've already planned everything out. We really don't need any additional dishes. I watched William's face redden. For the first time, I could see him hearing what I'd been hearing for years. The condescension, the subtle digs, the careful way she always managed to make me feel unwelcome. Actually, Mom, he said, his voice stronger than I'd ever heard it when speaking to her. Amelia's been working on something special. You're going to want to try it. Oh, honey, Margaret's laugh tinkled through the speaker like breaking glass. We all know Amelia's limitations in the kitchen. I'm just trying to avoid another disaster like last time. Remember the quinoa incident? The sauce began to thicken perfectly, and I smiled as I adjusted the heat. The quinoa incident had been deliberately undercooked, a small act of passive resistance that I now realized had only hurt myself. Mom, William started, but I caught his eye and shook my head. Let her think she'd won. Saturday would be sweeter that way. After we hung up, William came around the counter and wrapped his arms around my waist, watching as I finished the sauce. I'm sorry, he whispered. I never really heard it before. How she speaks to you. About you. I know. I leaned back against him briefly before returning to my work. But now you do. The next day brought a new challenge. I was doing my final practice run when my phone buzzed with a text from Marco. Emergency. Call me. My heart sank as I heard his news. The specialty mushrooms I needed for the dish, a crucial component, wouldn't be arriving. Supply chain issues. Nothing I can do, Marco said apologetically. They're stuck in customs in Lyon. I felt panic rising. The dish wouldn't be the same without those specific mushrooms. Chef Bernard had chosen this recipe particularly because it would showcase techniques that couldn't be faked, and those mushrooms were essential. There has to be another way, I muttered, pacing the kitchen. William found me like that an hour later, surrounded by cookbooks and notes. What's wrong? I explained the situation, expecting him to suggest I give up, maybe just bring a salad like his mother wanted. Instead, he grabbed his laptop. There's that new high-end restaurant that opened downtown, he said, typing quickly. The one with the French chef. Maybe they have connections? I stared at him, a plan forming. Le Petit Jardin? Charlotte Dubois is the head chef there. She trained with Chef Bernard a few years after me. Can you call her? I hesitated. Reaching out to the professional cooking world meant fully acknowledging that part of my life again. Was I ready? But then I thought of Margaret's smug smile, of all the times I'd dimmed my light to make others comfortable. I made the call. Charlotte remembered me immediately. Amelia? Ma chérie, Bernard told me you were in town, but you never came to see me. When I explained my situation, she laughed. Those mushrooms? I have a private supplier here who cultivates them. Come by tomorrow morning, we'll take care of you. As I hung up, William was grinning. See? The universe wants you to do this. I looked at my kitchen setup, at the notes and preparations, at my husband's encouraging face. You know your mother is going to be furious when she realizes she's been wrong about me all this time. He came over and tasted the sauce I'd been perfecting, his eyes widening at the flavor. Maybe, but she'll also have to admit she's been wrong. And maybe that's exactly what she needs. The next morning, I walked into Le Petit Jardin through the back door, the way I used to enter kitchens in Paris. The familiar sounds and smells hit me like a wave. The sizzle of pans, the shouts of, "Oui, chef," the orchestrated chaos of a professional kitchen during morning prep. Charlotte hugged me warmly, then stepped back to look at me. You've been away too long, chérie. A chef who doesn't cook. She shook her head. It's like a bird who doesn't fly. She handed me a package of the precious mushrooms, refusing payment. Consider it a welcome back gift. And Amelia? She caught my arm as I turned to leave. Show them who you really are. No holding back. Back home, I began my final practice run. Each element had to be perfect. The timing, the temperature, the presentation. As I worked, I felt more like myself than I had in years. William came home early again, watching me plate the dish with the precision of a surgeon. It's beautiful, he said softly, like watching art being made. I stepped back, studying the plate critically. Saturday will be different. Higher stakes. More pressure. He came to stand beside me, taking in the elegant composition, the perfect balance of colors and textures. You're ready, he said simply. I nodded slowly. I was ready, not just to cook, but to reclaim who I was. The only question was Margaret ready for what was coming? As if on cue, my phone buzzed with another text from her. Dear, I've decided to make my special coq au vin for Saturday. No need for you to trouble yourself with cooking anything. I showed the message to William, who read it and shook his head. She has no idea what's coming, does she? No, I smiled, already planning my final preparations. She really doesn't. The morning of the dinner arrived with a crack of thunder that rattled the windows. I'd been up since dawn, methodically going through my prep list. The kitchen counter was lined with ingredients, each measured and arranged with professional precision. My old kitchen timer, the one I'd used in Paris, ticked steadily in the background. William found me triple-checking my mise en place. You know, he said, setting down a cup of coffee next to my station. I always wondered why you were so organized about everything else in life, but seemed so scattered in the kitchen. Now I understand. You were playing a role. I picked up the coffee, grateful for his thoughtfulness. I got very good at being what everyone expected me to be. The scattered daughter-in-law who couldn't boil water. I checked the temperature of my proving drawer where a crucial element of the dish was developing. It became almost like a game, but I was the only one who knew we were playing. The doorbell rang, making us both jump. Through the frosted glass of our front door, I could make out a familiar silhouette. Margaret. She's early, William said, checking his watch. The dinner's not for hours. Of course she is. I quickly covered my prep work with clean kitchen towels. She's here to check up on me, to make sure I'm not going to ruin her dinner. William squared his shoulders. I'll handle this. But Margaret breezed past him as soon as he opened the door, making a beeline for the kitchen. Amelia, dear, I just thought I'd pop by to see if you needed any help. She paused, taking in the transformed space, her eyes narrowing at the professional equipment now on display. What's all this? Just preparing my contribution for tonight, I said calmly, noting how her gaze lingered on the covered ingredients. Oh, but didn't you get my message? I've planned everything already. There's really no need. Actually, Mom, William interrupted, Amelia's been working really hard on something special. Margaret's smile tightened. William, honey, we all know Amelia's abilities in the kitchen. I'm just trying to avoid any embarrassment. What would the family think? What exactly do you mean by that, Margaret? I asked quietly, my hand resting on my knife roll. She turned to me, her smile now practically glacial. Well, dear, let's be honest. Your last few attempts at cooking have been rather unfortunate. Remember Christmas? That overcooked turkey? The turkey you insisted I cook, even though I said I wasn't comfortable with it? The turkey I deliberately overcooked because she'd spent the entire morning hovering over my shoulder, criticizing every move I made. I was trying to teach you, dear. Every woman should know how to cook a proper holiday meal. She moved closer to one of the covered bowls. Now, why don't you let me see what you're planning? Perhaps I can offer some guidance. Before she could reach for the towel, William stepped between his mother and my workstation. Mom, that's enough. Margaret blinked in surprise. I'm only trying to help. No, you're not. William's voice was firm. You're trying to control the situation, like you always do. You're trying to make Amelia feel small, like you always do. And I've let you do it for far too long. Color rose in Margaret's cheeks. William Thompson, I don't know what's gotten into you, but what's gotten into me is that I've finally opened my eyes. Do you know what Amelia was doing before she met me? Do you have any idea who she really is? I touched his arm gently. William, not now. Margaret's eyes darted between us. What are you talking about? You'll find out tonight, I said softly. At dinner. Now see here. Margaret drew herself up to her full height. This is my family dinner. I won't have it ruined by whatever amateur experiment you're planning. It won't be ruined, I assured her, meeting her gaze steadily. Everything I make tonight will be perfect. I promise you that. She stared at me, perhaps seeing something different in my demeanor for the first time. The confident stance, the professional calm, the absolute certainty in my voice. None of it fit with the bumbling daughter-in-law she thought she knew. Well, she said finally, her voice slightly less certain. We'll see about that. She turned to leave, then paused. William, walk me to my car, dear. We need to talk. After they left, I uncovered my prep work and got back to it, my hands moving with practiced efficiency. Through the window, I could see William and his mother having what appeared to be a heated discussion by her car. Margaret was gesturing emphatically, her face red, while William stood his ground, shaking his head. When he came back inside, he looked drained but determined. She threatened to cancel the dinner entirely. I kept working, not looking up. And I told her she could cancel if she wanted, but then she'd never know what you're planning. She's too curious now. She won't cancel. I smiled slightly, checking the temperature of my reduction. No, she won't. She'll want to be there to witness what she assumes will be my greatest failure yet. William watched me work for a moment. You're enjoying this, aren't you? I considered the question as I adjusted the heat under my pan. Not the conflict, I said finally, but being myself again? Working at my real skill level? Yes, I'm enjoying that very much. He came closer, observing my technique with newfound appreciation. Show me how I can help. As I began walking him through some basic prep work, I glanced at the clock. 6 hours until dinner. 6 hours until everything changed. The timer continued its steady ticking, counting down to the moment when Margaret, and everyone else, would finally see the real me. Thunder rolled again outside, but this time I barely noticed it. I was in my element, every movement precise, every decision confident. Let the storm come. I was ready. Margaret's house was already buzzing with activity when we arrived. Through the large bay windows, I could see family members milling about, their shadows casting long shapes across the manicured lawn. I sat in our parked car for a moment, my carefully packed containers secure in their professional carrying case beside me. Ready? William asked, squeezing my hand. I did a mental check of everything I'd prepared, every component safely stored at the perfect temperature. Almost too ready, I replied with a small smile. I feel like I'm about to plate for a Michelin inspector again. Better, William grinned. You're about to plate for Margaret Thompson. As we walked up the path to the front door, my sister-in-law Bella burst out to meet us. Oh, thank God you're here, she whispered urgently. Mom's in a mood. She's already made Aunt Claire cry about her store-bought pie. I exchanged a look with William. Apparently, Margaret's morning visit to our house had left her more rattled than she'd let on. She was asserting control the only way she knew how, by being more Margaret than usual. The kitchen was her domain, and as we entered, I could see her holding court. She'd positioned herself at the center island, directing traffic like a general commanding troops. No, the serving dishes need to be arranged by height. Jessica, dear, that centerpiece is blocking conversation paths. Michael, the wine needs to breathe properly. She paused mid-instruction when she saw me, her eyes immediately going to the professional carrying case in my hands. Oh, Amelia, dear, you actually brought something? As promised, I said calmly, noting how the rest of the family had gone quietly attentive. They were all too familiar with the tension between us, though they'd always been too polite to mention it. Well, Margaret's smile was tight. I suppose we can find some space for it on the side table with the other additional dishes. Actually, William spoke up, Amelia's dish needs to be plated fresh. We'll need some space in the kitchen. Margaret's smile froze completely. The kitchen during family dinner was her exclusive territory. Everyone knew that. I don't think that will be possible. I have everything planned very precisely. I set my case down and began unpacking with practiced efficiency. The familiar motions centered me, checking temperatures, ensuring nothing had shifted during transport. I only need a small corner for about 15 minutes before serving, I said, my voice professional and courteous. Everything else is fully prepped. Prepped? Margaret's eyebrow arched. My, aren't we using fancy terminology? I didn't respond, continuing my methodical unpacking. From the corner of my eye, I could see various family members trying to peek at what I was doing, their curiosity piqued by the unusual tension in the air. Mom, William said quietly but firmly, Amelia gets space in the kitchen. This isn't a discussion. A loaded silence fell. In 3 years of family dinners, this was the first time William had directly challenged his mother's kitchen authority. Margaret's face flushed, but before she could respond, my father-in-law Richard spoke up from the doorway. Excellent idea. I've always said this kitchen is too big for just one cook. He smiled warmly at me. What are you making, Amelia? It smells wonderful already. I returned his smile, grateful for the intervention. Richard had always been kind to me, though he generally stayed out of kitchen politics. It's a surprise, I said, catching the flash of annoyance on Margaret's face at my evasion. A surprise? Cousin Jessica piped up. How exciting. Mom, didn't you say Amelia was bringing something special tonight? Margaret's laugh was brittle. Did I? I don't recall. You did, Bella jumped in, a mischievous glint in her eye. You called me this morning quite worked up about it, actually. I continued my preparations, allowing the family dynamics to swirl around me while I focused on my work. I could feel Margaret watching my every move, trying to figure out what I was doing. The professional-grade equipment I was unpacking, the precise way I was checking temperatures and adjusting settings, none of it fit with the clumsy daughter-in-law she thought she knew. Amelia, she said suddenly, those herbs you're using, they look different from the ones in my garden. They're from a specialty supplier, I replied, not looking up from my work. The regular variety wouldn't have the right flavor profile for this dish. Flavor profile? She latched onto the term. My, you have been doing your research, haven't you? I smiled slightly, remembering long nights in Paris perfecting this very technique. You could say that. The doorbell rang, announcing more guests. Margaret hesitated, torn between her hosting duties and her desire to supervise whatever I was doing. We'll be eating in 30 minutes, she announced firmly. I hope whatever you're planning will be ready by then. It will be perfect in exactly 27 minutes, I replied with professional certainty, which is precisely when the coq au vin needs to rest for optimal serving temperature. She stared at me, clearly thrown by my confident assessment of her signature dish's timing. Without another word, she turned and left to greet the new arrivals, though I noticed she stationed Bella near the kitchen with instructions to keep an eye on things. William, who had been quietly helping me set up, leaned in close. I've never seen her this rattled, he whispered. What exactly are you making? I began laying out my plating tools with the same precision I'd used at L'Etoile. Something that can't be faked, I said softly. Something that requires years of classical French training to execute properly. Bella drifted closer. curiosity overtaking her assigned surveillance duty. Is that what I think it is?" she asked, peering at one of my containers. I nodded and her eyes widened. "But Mom's going to—" "I know," I said calmly, checking my timer. 22 minutes to go. Through the kitchen door, I could hear Margaret's voice rising and falling as she greeted guests, her practiced hostess laugh carrying over the growing buzz of conversation. Soon, she would have to return to the kitchen to finish her preparations. Soon, everything would change. I took a deep breath, centering myself the way I used to before service at L'Etoile. The familiar calm of professional focus settled over me as I began my final preparations. Let Margaret laugh. Let her try to maintain control. In 22 minutes, she would learn what 3 years of culinary school and 2 years at a 3-star Michelin restaurant could produce. The timer ticked steadily on, counting down to the moment of truth. The final minutes of preparation passed in a focused blur. My hands moved with practiced precision as I assembled each plate, muscle memory from countless services in Paris taking over. Each element had to be perfect: the temperature, the placement, the timing. Margaret returned to the kitchen just as I was finishing the first plate. She stopped dead in her tracks, staring at what I was doing. The professional plating techniques, the elegant presentation, the complexity of the dish, none of it aligned with her perception of me. What is this?" she demanded, moving closer to inspect my work. "Tornados Rossini," I replied calmly, placing another perfectly seared piece of beef on the second plate. With traditional foie gras, black truffle, and a classic Périgordine sauce. The accompaniments are pommes soufflées and glazed baby vegetables. Her face went through a series of expressions. Disbelief, confusion, suspicion. "That's impossible. This is one of the most technically challenging French dishes. You can't possibly—" "Can't I?" I looked up from my plating, meeting her eyes directly. "Would you like me to explain the classical technique for achieving the proper sear while maintaining a perfect medium rare? Or perhaps you'd like to discuss the precise temperature control needed for the sauce reduction?" The kitchen had gone silent except for the soft sizzle of my pan. Bella and William watched wide-eyed as their mother struggled to respond. Through the door, I could hear the other family members gathering in the dining room, their muffled conversations creating a distant buzz. "I don't know what game you're playing," Margaret finally said, her voice tight. "But no games, Margaret." I finished another plate with a flourish of sauce. "This is who I've always been. I trained at Le Cordon Bleu in Paris and spent 2 years as sous chef at L'Etoile. 3 Michelin stars. I've made this dish hundreds of times." The color drained from her face. "You're lying." "Mom?" William stepped forward, holding up his phone. "Look." He showed her the article from Le Figaro, the one praising my work at L'Etoile. "This is Amelia, the real Amelia." Margaret snatched the phone, her hands shaking slightly as she read. Around us, family members had begun to drift into the kitchen, drawn by the mounting tension and the extraordinary aromas filling the air. Is that what I think it is?" Uncle Robert, who had spent years in France for business, peered at my plates with growing excitement. "My God, I haven't seen a proper Tornados Rossini since that little place in Paris." "L'Etoile?" I suggested, adding the final touches to another plate. His eyes widened. "Yes. How did you—" "Amelia worked there," Bella announced proudly. "She was their sous chef." A murmur ran through the gathered family members. Margaret remained frozen, still staring at the phone in her hands. "But—" She finally looked up at me. "Why? Why did you pretend? Why did you let you believe I couldn't cook?" I carefully wiped the edge of the final plate. "Because when I met William, I wanted to be loved for who I was, not what I could do in a kitchen. And then I met you, and you were so proud of being the family's culinary expert, so invested in teaching your hopeless daughter-in-law basic skills." I shrugged. "It seemed easier to play along." "Easier?" Her voice rose. "You made me look like a fool." "No, Margaret," I said quietly, looking directly at her. "You did that yourself. Every time you belittled me, every time you humiliated me in front of the family, those were your choices." The silence that followed was deafening. Family members shifted uncomfortably, perhaps remembering all the times they'd witnessed her subtle and not-so-subtle digs at me. "Well?" Richard's warm voice broke the tension. "I don't know about anyone else, but I'm starving, and these plates look absolutely magnificent." "They do," Aunt Claire agreed quickly. "Amelia, dear, this is incredible." One by one, family members stepped forward to admire the dishes, exclaiming over the professional presentation and mouth-watering aromas. Margaret remained rooted in place, watching as her family's attention, usually focused solely on her cooking, shifted to my creation. "Mom," William said softly, "this doesn't have to be a competition. Amelia's not trying to replace you. She's just finally being herself." Margaret's eyes moved from the plates to me, then back to the phone, showing evidence of my culinary past. I could see her struggling with this new reality, with the realization that everything she thought she knew about me was wrong. Finally, she squared her shoulders. "Well," she said, her voice slightly unsteady, "I suppose we should serve these while they're at the proper temperature." It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it was an acknowledgement of my professional expertise, however grudging. As we began to move the plates to the dining room, she paused beside me. "The sauce," she said quietly. "It's perfect. The consistency, the sheen. I've never managed to get it quite right." I hesitated, then offered, "I could show you sometime, if you'd like." Our eyes met, and for the first time in 3 years, I saw something new in her expression, a glimmer of respect, and perhaps a hint of regret. "I would like that," she said finally. "Very much." The dining room fell silent as everyone took their first bites. I found myself holding my breath, years of professional training reminding me that this moment, when diners first taste your food, is always sacred. William squeezed my hand under the table. Uncle Robert was the first to speak. "Extraordinary," he breathed, closing his eyes in appreciation. "This takes me right back to Paris. The sauce. It's exactly as I remember it." A chorus of appreciative murmurs and exclamations followed. Aunt Claire was practically crying over her plate. "I've never tasted anything like this," she said, dabbing at her eyes. "Amelia, darling, how could you keep this talent hidden from us?" I noticed Margaret watching me carefully as I answered questions about my training, my time in Paris, the techniques involved in the dish. Her own coq au vin sat largely untouched at her place setting, the first time I'd ever seen her ignore her own cooking at a family dinner. "The temperature control on the meat is perfect," she said suddenly, cutting through the chatter. Everyone turned to look at her. That's the hardest part to master. Getting that exact gradient from sear to center." She met my eyes across the table. "How many times did you practice this dish before tonight?" "This week? 4 complete run-throughs," I replied honestly. "But I've made it hundreds of times before. It was one of our signature dishes at L'Étoile." She nodded slowly. "I tried to make this once, you know. Years ago. It was a disaster." A small, self-deprecating smile crossed her face. "I suppose I should have realized something was off when you couldn't even make a basic vinaigrette but could perfectly dice vegetables in uniform sizes." "Your knife work," Bella exclaimed. "I always wondered why it was so precise even when everything else seemed, well, deliberately messy," I finished for her. "It's hard to unlearn proper technique. Sometimes I had to concentrate more on doing things incorrectly than I would have on doing them right." "But why?" Margaret set down her fork. "Why go to all that trouble? Why pretend for so long?" The table went quiet again, everyone listening intently. I took a sip of wine, gathering my thoughts. "When I met William, I was burned out," I began. "Professional kitchens are intense, demanding places. I loved the work, but I was tired of being defined by it. When people found out I was a chef, it became all they saw." I looked at William, who smiled encouragingly. With William, I could just be Amelia. Not Chef Amelia, not the cook, just me. "And then you met me," Margaret said softly, "and I immediately tried to teach you how to boil water. You were so proud of your role in the family," I acknowledged. "The way everyone looked forward to your cooking, how you nurtured them through food. I didn't want to threaten that. So you dimmed your light," Aunt Claire said, understanding dawning on her face. To protect everyone else's feelings. To protect myself too, I admitted. It was easier than dealing with the competition, the comparisons, the politics of it all. But it wasn't sustainable, William finished for me. You couldn't keep hiding who you really are. Margaret was quiet for a long moment, pushing food around her plate. Finally, she looked up at me. I was horrible to you, she said bluntly. All those times I criticized and belittled you. You could have put me in my place at any moment. Shown everyone what you could really do. Why didn't you? Because it was never about proving anything, I replied. I didn't want to humble you or show you up. I just wanted to be accepted as part of the family. Tears welled in Margaret's eyes, the first time I'd ever seen her cry. And instead, I made you feel like you didn't belong, like you weren't good enough. She dabbed at her eyes with her napkin. The irony is, if I'd known who you really were, I would have been so proud to have you as a daughter-in-law, a classically trained French chef, working at a 3-star restaurant. I would have been bragging about you to everyone I know. You still can, Bella piped up. And now you two can cook together. Imagine the holiday meals. A laugh rippled around the table, breaking the tension. Margaret smiled. A real smile this time, not her usual controlled one. I'd like that, she said, looking at me. If you're willing to teach me some of your techniques, that sauce really is extraordinary. I'd like that too, I replied, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. Though I have to warn you, I can be quite demanding in the kitchen. Just ask any of my old line cooks. She's not joking, William added. You should have seen her drilling me on proper knife technique this week. I've never been so scared of chopping carrots in my life. More laughter, more stories. As the evening continued, I watched the family dynamic shift and reshape itself around this new reality. Uncle Robert wanted to hear about every restaurant I'd worked at in Paris. Cousin Jessica begged me to teach her how to make proper croissants. Even Margaret's competitive edge seemed to soften as she asked detailed questions about classical French techniques. As dishes were cleared and dessert was served, I caught William watching me with a tender expression. What? I asked quietly. You're glowing, he said. I don't think I've ever seen you so completely yourself. He was right. For the first time in 3 years, I felt fully present, fully authentic. No more hiding, no more pretending to be less than I was. And surprisingly, now that the truth was out, I found myself looking forward to cooking with Margaret, to sharing my knowledge rather than concealing it. Sometimes I realized the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about becoming whole. 3 months after the revelatory family dinner, I stood in Margaret's kitchen, watching her execute a perfect crème anglaise. Her technique had improved remarkably over our weekly cooking sessions, her natural talent finally matched with proper training. Look at that ribbon, she said proudly, lifting the spoon to show the sauce's perfect consistency. I never knew the exact temperature made such a difference. That's beautiful work, I agreed, feeling a genuine surge of pride. Teaching Margaret had revealed something unexpected. She was an excellent student, eager to learn and quick to master new techniques. Our initial cooking lessons, tentative and slightly awkward, had evolved into something I looked forward to each week. You know, she said, carefully straining the sauce, I was thinking about what you said last week, about the cooking classes. I nodded, remembering our conversation. Several family members had been asking me to teach them, and the idea of starting small cooking classes had begun to take shape. Well, Margaret continued, the sunroom would make a perfect teaching space. Good light, plenty of room for workstations. And I know quite a few ladies from my garden club who would be interested. I looked at her in surprise. You'd be willing to host the classes here? Partner in them, actually. She met my eyes. If you're interested, you bring the professional expertise, I bring the local connections and space. We could start small, see how it goes. The offer touched me deeply. This was more than just an olive branch. It was an acknowledgement of my expertise and an invitation to truly collaborate. I'd love that, I said softly. She smiled, then turned back to her sauce. Good, because I already have a waiting list of 12 people who want to learn how to make that Tornados Rossini. Later that evening, As William and I hosted Bella and her husband for dinner, I found myself moving confidently around my kitchen, no longer hiding my skills or dampening my passion for cooking. "You two aren't going to believe this," Bella announced over the appetizer I'd prepared. "Mom's joined Instagram. She's posting pictures of everything she's learning from Amelia." "She has more followers than me," William laughed. "Yesterday, she sent me a text asking where to buy truffle oil. The good kind," she specified. "Who is this woman and what has she done with our mother?" "She's still Margaret," I said, plating the main course with professional precision. "She just has a new outlet for her perfectionism. You should see her brunoise dice now. It's impeccable." The truth was, letting go of her need to be the family's sole culinary expert had revealed a softer side of Margaret. She'd even started telling people about her own early cooking disasters, something the old Margaret would never have admitted to. Last week, during our lesson, she'd suddenly said, "I owe you an apology." "You've already apologized," I'd reminded her. But she shook her head. "Not just for how I treated you, for making you feel like you had to hide who you are. No one should have to make themselves smaller to make others comfortable." That conversation had marked a turning point in our relationship. The competition had transformed into collaboration, the criticism into genuine curiosity. "Oh," Bella's voice brought me back to the present. "Tell them about Christmas." I smiled, beginning to plate dessert. "Margaret and I are co-hosting this year. We're planning a French-American fusion menu. Traditional dishes from both cuisines, reimagined." "The family chat is going crazy about it," Bella added. "Even the cousins who usually skip Christmas are coming." As I put the finishing touches on the dessert plates, a modern take on a classic Paris breast, I caught William watching me with that same tender expression I'd seen at the Revelation dinner. "Still glowing," he said softly when I raised an eyebrow at him. He was right. The joy of being fully myself, of using my skills openly and sharing them with others, hadn't dimmed. If anything, it had grown stronger. Later that night, after our guests had left, I found myself looking through old photos from my days at L'Étoile. Among them was a quote I'd written down from Chef Bernard: "La cuisine est un acte d'amour." Cooking is an act of love. I hadn't truly understood that when I was in Paris, too focused on perfection and technique. But now, teaching Margaret, planning classes, cooking openly for my family, I finally got it. Food wasn't just about skill or showing off or proving something. It was about connection, about sharing, about nurturing not just bodies, but relationships. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Made the crème anglaise again. Perfect temperature this time. Thank you for teaching me to really cook." I smiled as I typed back, "Thank you for letting me be myself." A moment later, another text. "Next week, soufflés. Brave," I replied. "But yes, time to face your fears. With you teaching me, not scared at all." I set down my phone, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the kitchen. The revenge I'd planned had transformed into something far better than I could have imagined. Instead of showing Margaret up, I'd found a way to show her, and myself, that there was room for both of us to shine. The next morning, I woke early and headed to the kitchen, pulling out my professional knives and tools. No more hiding them away. No more pretending to be less than I was. As I began prep for the day, I smiled, remembering something Chef Bernard used to say: "La vie, comme la cuisine, est meilleure quand elle est authentique." Life, like cooking, is better when it's authentic. He was right. Being authentic had not only freed me, but had created space for others to be authentic too. Margaret had become a dedicated student instead of a harsh critic. William had found his voice in standing up for me. And I had finally found my place in the family, not despite my skills, but because of them. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, catching the edge of my knife as I began to slice vegetables with precise, confident movements. No more measuring my cuts to be intentionally uneven. No more dulling my shine. This was who I was. A trained chef, a teacher, a wife, a daughter-in-law. Finally, perfectly, authentically me.